9 hikers fled their tent into the freezing night. When they were found, some were missing their eyes and even their tongues. What really happened at the Dyatlov Pass? January 23rd, 1959. A group of university students set out on what should have been a challenging but routine winter expedition into the remote Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. The group were students of the Ural Polytechnic Institute. There were 10 of them in total, 8 men and 2 women. All were experienced hikers who had trained for difficult winter conditions. They had completed similar treks before, and this journey was meant to qualify them for one of the highest levels of hiking certification awarded in the Soviet Union. The trek would be demanding. The route led them into the frozen wilderness, through snow-covered forests, and across exposed mountain slopes where temperatures could drop well below freezing. To reach the starting point, the group first travelled by train to a small town in Sverdlovsk Oblast. From there, they continued north by truck and eventually by horse-drawn transport, pushing farther and farther into one of the most isolated regions of the country. Their final stop before the wilderness was the tiny settlement of Vishai, one of the last inhabited villages in the area. From there, they would continue on skis and on foot. The expedition officially began on January 27th. Leading the group was 23-year-old engineering student Igor Dyatlov. According to photographs and journal entries recovered later, the group was in high spirits as they began their trek. They laughed, joked, and documented their progress with cameras and written diaries. In these photographs, the hikers can be seen smiling in the snow, clearly enjoying the adventure. However, early into the expedition, the group encountered its first problem. After just one full day of travel, 21-year-old Yuri Yudin was forced to turn back. He suffered from chronic rheumatism, and the cold, combined with the physical strain of the journey, caused severe joint pain. Reluctantly, he said goodbye to the others and began the trip back alone. It was a decision that would ultimately save his life. The remaining 9 hikers pressed on into the mountains. Over the next several days, they navigated difficult terrain using skis, pushing through the deep snow and harsh winter conditions. Eventually, they began ascending the eastern slope of a mountain known to the local Mansi people as Kholat Syakal. Translated roughly, the name means Dead Mountain. Not because of tragedy, but because the barren slopes support very little wildlife. On February 1st, the weather worsened dramatically. Powerful winds swept across the mountain, and heavy snowfall reduced visibility. the group drifted slightly off their planned route as they climbed the slope. As darkness approached, they made a decision. Instead of descending to the shelter of the forest below, they set up camp directly on the mountainside. The hikers dug a flat platform into the snow to pitch their large tent. Inside the tent that evening, Igor Dyatlov wrote what would become the final entry in the expedition's diary. He described how exhausted the group was after the day's hike. Firewood was scarce on the exposed ridge, and the small amount they had was damp. Yet, inside the tent, they managed to stay relatively warm while eating dinner together. Outside, the wind howled across the mountain. Hundreds of kilometers from the nearest settlement, the group settled in for the night. The hikers were expected to return by February 12th. At first, when they didn't arrive on time, there was little concern. Delays were common in winter expeditions, and Yuri Yudin, the one member who had turned back, had been warned that the group might return late. But as days passed with no word, anxiety began to grow. Finally, on February 20th, a search operation was launched. Rescue teams, volunteers, and military personnel began combing the mountains in search of the missing hikers. Nearly a week later, the searchers discovered the group's campsite. What they found raised immediate alarm. The tent was partially buried in snow, but many of the hikers' belongings were still inside. Boots, clothing, and essential survival equipment. Even more disturbing was the condition of the tent itself. The fabric had been slashed open from the inside. It appeared the hikers had cut the way out in a desperate attempt to escape. Footprints were discovered leading away from the tent and down the mountainside towards the forest below. The tracks told a strange story. They suggested the group had not run in panic, but instead had walked downhill at a steady pace. Some of the footprints showed bare feet or only socks. Further down the slope, beneath a large cedar tree at the edge of a forest, the searchers made their first grim discovery. 2 frozen bodies lay near the remains of a small campfire. The victims were dressed only in thin clothing, far too little to survive temperatures that night, which may have fallen to nearly -30 degrees Celsius. The branches of the cedar tree above them were broken high off the ground, suggesting someone had climbed it. Both bodies also showed signs of burns and injuries. One of the victims was later found to have a small piece of flesh from his own hand inside his mouth. As the search continued, 3 more bodies were found scattered along the slope between the cedar tree and the abandoned tent. It appeared these hikers had attempted to make their way back to the campsite, but collapsed from the cold before they could reach it. Many months later, when the snow began to melt, the final 4 hikers were discovered in a ravine deeper in the forest. Their injuries were the most disturbing of all. Several had suffered massive internal trauma, broken ribs and fractured skulls, yet showed surprisingly little external damage. Even more unsettling, some of the bodies were missing their eyes and tongues. Investigators also found that certain pieces of clothing carried traces of radiation. Despite a thorough investigation, Soviet authorities never reached a definitive explanation. The official report simply concluded that the hikers had died from the effects of an unknown compelling force. Over the decades, the mystery of what happened on that mountain has sparked endless speculation. Some theories suggest secret military weapons tests. Others claim the hikers may have encountered a Yeti or even extraterrestrial visitors. But none of these ideas have ever been supported by credible evidence. More grounded explanations focus on natural causes. One theory suggests that powerful winds created a phenomenon known as infrasound, low-frequency vibrations capable of triggering intense feelings of anxiety or panic. Such a sound could have frightened the hikers enough to flee their tent. Another possibility is that their stove malfunctioned, filling the tent with toxic smoke and forcing them to escape quickly. But the theory that has gained the most support in recent years is that of a small avalanche. Even a minor slab of shifting snow could have partially buried the tent, causing the hikers to cut the way out in fear of a larger collapse. Once outside, disoriented by darkness and blizzard conditions, the group may have headed downhill towards the forest in search of shelter. There, they attempted to survive the night, but the extreme cold quickly overwhelmed them. In 2021, scientists at a Swiss avalanche research lab ran computer simulations to test this theory. Using advanced snow modeling software originally developed for animation, the researchers concluded that a small avalanche could indeed explain the severe injuries found in the ravine victims. Today, the site of the tragedy is known as Dyatlov Pass, named after the group's leader. A small memorial now stands near the forest where the hikers attempted to build their final fire. The 9 members of the expedition are buried together in a cemetery in Yekaterinburg. And Yuri Yudin, the only member of the group who survived after turning back early, lived the rest of his life wondering what truly happened that night. Yuri passed away in 2013 at the age of 75. More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the most haunting and mysterious tragedies ever to occur in those mountains. And despite decades of investigation, one question still lingers. What really forced 9 experienced hikers to abandon their tent and walk into the frozen darkness? Let me know your theory down in the comments. If you enjoyed this investigation, please make sure to subscribe to Evidence Box 404, because the next file we open might be even stranger. Farewell.